Hello, welcome to the third reveals for Into the Emerald Dreams. This episode, I think we're dealing with all the remaining neutrals. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not, but at the very least, we're going to have seen the full neutral package. There's also one class card that we'll deal with at the end. So let's get through some of this pretty quickly. Dreambound Raptor, 1 mana 2/1 beast. After you play a minion, give it a random bonus effect. For a 1-drop, I think it's slightly understated. I think in nowadays modern Hearthstone, for a decent stat line on a 1-drop, you're kind of looking for a 1 mana 2/2. That's like the sweet spot. It can be a 2/1 or a 1/2 if you get a good effect on top of it. So let's evaluate the effect. Giving a minion a random bonus effect is one of, 8 different keywords you can give it, like Rush, Divine Shield, Elusive, I can't remember all of them anymore, but Reborn, I think Lifesteal's one of them. I'm sure I've missed any. There's 8 of them anyway. It's one of those bonus effect words. The card I'm going to compare this to first is Undying Allies, and which is basically the effect of the card. Now, Reborn is one of the bonus effect keywords you can get, and after you play a minion is kind of the trigger of the effect. Undying Allies requires an undead. I will concede that is a bit more specific. Whereas Dreambound Raptor, you don't need to have a specific family of minions. It can be any minion you play. However, I think of all the bonus effects, Reborn is one of the better ones out there, so you get quite a lot of value for this. And it sort of implies that this adding a bonus effect onto a card is something you could put it as about a 0 mana effect. I do think it's probably close to like a half mana type effect, the bonus effects, verging on a 1 mana effect depending on how good they are. But either way, you're on like a basically par-statted 1-drop with a fairly weak effect on top of it. The other real downside of this card, and why I think it won't see any play, is that it's statted in a really bad way. I talk sometimes like things are understatted, but they're statted in a good way. If you have an effect that you want to use multiple times, ideally over multiple turns, you want it to have more health, so it stays on the board for longer. If you're trying to use this card in some sort of aggressive deck, you might want to have more attack, especially if it's like Rush, for example, where you might want to push through as much damage as possible, in which case give me more attack and less health. This thing, you kind of want it to stay on the field, and it only has 1 health, so it's so easily pinged by, the Mage hero power, the Death Knight hero power, the Demon Hunter hero power to just completely counters it, right? You play the 1 mana 2/1, and on turn 1, they can ping that thing immediately, so it has got some weaknesses. I mean, if you look at other comparative, cards, I would say, Magic Carpet, which gave a minion Rush, which again is one of the bonus effects you can get, and +1 attack, but only on 1-cost minions, was statted pretty nicely, right? It had 7 stats, which is like the average you'd get for a 3-drop. It's par for the course, but it was statted in such a good way that it had so much survivability on it. 1/6, that thing's going to be hard to remove on turn 3. Dreambound Raptor, not so hard to remove. And actually, even on a similar scale, Treasure Distributor, which used to say, after you summon a pirate, you give it and the pirate +1 attack, so you'd get 2 stats overall. It now only gives the thing that gets summoned 1 stat, which is kind of probably weaker than the bonus effect, to be honest with you, but this card was a 1/2, which I do appreciate could scale and scale and scale, but just that 1 additional health instead of the attack meant that you could sometimes drop it on turn 1 and it would just live through turn 1 into turn 2. It can't get pinged easily. The Death Knight button doesn't immediately trade with it. The Demon Hunter button doesn't trade with it immediately, so I think it's a really big deal it's being a 2/1 and not a 1/2. To get to its effect, though, if you can actually keep this thing on the board, and realistically, you're probably going to have to just combo this on the turn that you're trying to do the other things with, what can you do? Well, obviously anything that copies itself, and there are a few things in the game, but including the new card, Blood Thistle Illusionist, you get twice as many bonus effects, basically. I assume it also copies the bonus effect of the card that, like the random one you get first time, so you'll get 2, Rush, or 2 Reborn, for example. And actually, getting to that point, there are some really nice keywords you could hit on this. If you get Reborn or Divine Shield, then the one that takes damage and just instantly pops immediately will, with Reborn, come back as a 2/1 again, so you get even more stats for the cost. And if that's Divine Shield, then it's going to just be a little bit more tricky to remove. So, yeah, anything that copies itself, pretty good with the Dreambound Raptor. Then, just generally speaking, any of the Zerg cards where you can summon a bunch of guys for fairly cheap, that's going to be a pretty good deal, right? You play your Dreambound Raptor, you play a bunch of Zerglings, they get a keyword on top of them, and that's going to improve their quality. So there are some situations where I can see this, but I think just because you can't curve it out easily, I don't see it. Critter Caretaker is another neutral. We've got 1 mana 2/2. At the end of your turn, restore 3 health to both heroes. It's one of those things, again, where 4 stats on a 1-cost card, I think, is kind of like what you're looking for nowadays to have any chance of seeing any play. And this has those stats, and actually, you probably want it in the form of 2 attack, 2 health. It's pretty reasonable, because 3 attack, 1 health is too easy to cleave. Clear off the board. And 1-3 is just not threatening enough. So 2-2 is like that current sweet spot. And we've seen this type of stat line see play in Standard, right? You've seen it in the form of the guy, and I'm so bad with names, the guy that death rattles into the snake oil. That card saw a lot of play in a lot of decks just purely because you could splash it into any deck and it was a pretty reasonable 1-drop to play. Now, the Critter Caretaker has a downside associated with it in the fact that it has asymmetrical effect. So you do get these, like, I'm going to say better than the average stat lines, but it's kind of like, I think for modern Hearthstone, it's kind of like the par of the course, but maybe slightly above par, so we'll say that. Slightly above par stat line. However, if you try and do any damage with it, you're just going to heal off the damage it can do with its effect, and actually and then some as well. We've also seen cards with this type of like effect before, but not symmetrical. Benevolent Djinn, for example, in Paladin, which was just restore 3 health to your hero, and this was understated for the mana cost rather than Critter Caretaker, which is slightly overstated. This card didn't see that much play, funnily enough. Nor do I necessarily think Critter Caretaker would see play, because it's not really good enough for an aggressive card, right? Because it heals the damage it could do, and it's not a threatening enough stat line. It's not like a 1-mana 3/3, for example, which could be like, you know, that thing's going to trade into a few of your minions and just be generally annoying. This thing is like, it's kind of a bit too fair for me. It's also worth mentioning as well, you could see this as a dream control card, because in the first few turns, you just want to live, right? And this thing potentially can give you some health so you don't take damage, and force your opponent who just wants to go to the face to trade into it, and maybe lose a minion in the process. The problem with that, though, is health is capped, right? You go into the game at 30 health, or if you're in Wild and have Renathal, maybe 40 or something. On turn 1, you're very unlikely to have lost any health, unless you've got against a Demon Hunter that's pinged you or something. So, for the most part, it's going to do nothing on the first turn. On the second turn, if you attack with the Critter Caretaker, it's going to wipe basically its attack out, assuming it goes into the face, so... And if you've not taken any damage, you've gained no health from it. It'd be much better if this was armor, which is why Cargo Guard, which has the same effect of Benevolent Djinn but is armor, has seen a bit of play in the past. Now, I will also say this had Pirate Tribe, which at the time was important for that card as well, so it's not quite a fair comparison. But the card that I really see this like akin to, or what I think it's trying to like emulate, is something like Armor Vendor, where you just play your 1-mana 1/3, you get 4 armor, and you prolong the game maybe just long enough, one more turn versus an aggro deck because you both get 4 armor. Critter Caretaker can kind of do that type of thing, but it's just not quite as good as the Armor Vendor because, firstly, it's not that hard to clear off the board, right, with a 2 health stat line. It's not aggressive enough to do damage, so it's not really great for an aggro card. And the fact it's healing 3 health at a time means if you're not taking any damage in the process, the card's not doing anything, right? So, I think it's okay, but not fantastic. Then again, you have to remember as well, like, I talk about all these, like, power level stuff. Obviously, it's going to be a big power level dip right now because 3 sets have just rotated out, whereas 1 is rotating back in again. So, maybe there is some space for some of these cards that otherwise would never have seen any play, now that the rotation is happening. We also have Daydreaming Pixie, 2-mana 0/4. At the end of your turn, get a random nature spell. I was actually surprised when I went through like the wild cards. I couldn't find too many cards that said like at the end of your turn, get a random X. One of the cards I found was Cabal Trafficker, which I honestly forgot was even a card, which at the end of the turn gave you a random demon to your hand. I don't think this card saw that much play because I have no memory of it whatsoever. Basically, because random cards are probably worse than the average card you can put in your deck. That is the logic. The other card I think is a better comparison maybe than this because it's a spell that it generates is Vile Apothecary. Now, Vile Apothecary generated a concoction. A concoction was a below average spell. Obviously, when you combine them together, they were above average spells then, so that was the deal for concoctions. But generally speaking, if you just made one concoction, it was below average quality for a spell. I'm going to make the assumption that a random nature spell, and we've not seen the full nature spell set yet at this point, so that things may change. I'm going to assume it's below an average spell you would put in your deck in terms of quality. Now, what is important is Vile Apothecary even in concoction decks, and concoction decks did work back when Vile Apothecary was a card. Didn't put Apothecary in the deck because it was too slow. And that's kind of where I see Daydreaming Pixie. It's just too slow, right? You're playing a 2-mana 0/4. I do appreciate it's statted actually quite nicely. If you're going to be an understatted card, which this is, it's only 4 stats for 2 mana, it's all in health. You don't really care about the attack here, you just want the value. So hopefully try and get this card to live through multiple turns. And there's a decent chance at turn 2, if you drop this on the board, you're going to get 2 random nature spells. So it's not that bad in those regards. But still, random nature spells probably not good enough. Also unfortunate for this card is we just had a nature archetype in Shaman. It's all rotating out, baby, so yeah, Nature Shaman won't really be a thing anymore, but until we see all the cards from the set going forward, maybe there is another class that's going to be doing some sort of nature package, in which case the Pixie may see play in that deck. The other unfortunate thing is you might want to do it in a Spell School type deck. Mage is rotating the Spell School stuff out, and Mage would love to have access to nature spells guaranteed, because they don't normally. There is still a Spell School deck out there, it's Shaman. Shaman has access to nature spells, better than Daydreaming Pixie is probably going to give you, so I don't think it's going to get any play in that deck. The only thing I can see right now, and again, I don't want to bait you into playing this deck because it won't work, if Burgle Rogue becomes a thing, it is a way to generate a nature spell, presumably from another class because it's random. A bit of care though, Rogue has a nature spell. Everyone forgets this, I think, but Deadly Poison is a nature spell, so there is a chance that you generate a Rogue spell, in which case if you're playing Burgle Rogue, you're going to be super unhappy. But it's okay, you're already super unhappy because you're playing Burgle Rogue to begin with. Then we have Dream Rager, 3 mana 5/1 elusive. I don't want to say too much about this. Rager's a card with 5/1 stat lines. The mana cost varies depending on the effects they have on them, between 2 and 3. The more recent, I think, Rager that was added to the game was Cactus Rager. Maybe there was actually one more recent than this, but that's the one I picked up on first, which was a 2 mana 5/1 with Poisonous on it. That saw no play. 3 mana 5/1 won't see any play either. I do appreciate part of the reason that the Ragers are particularly bad is the Mage Hero Power hard counters them, they just ping them for 2 mana. You don't even use a card, and you just kill a 3 mana card. You can't do that with Dream Rager, but you can still get hit by, I mean, I guess Demon Hunter, but like, that's a fucking aggressive trade if you're going to do it. That is a Tungsten Balls trade if you use your button and Demon Hunter to trade it for the Rager. And Death Knight can just ping it with the 1/1. Generally speaking, 1 health is pretty easy to do. You can trade into it normally with a 1 mana minion. Therefore, the Ragers are normally not that good. So I don't think this Rager will be good unless there is some sort of support for 1 health minions. Now we get to another neutral Curious Cumulus. And it is a bit of a curious card. 4 mana 3/5 elemental. At the end of your turn, give your hero Divine Shield. Okay, interesting. We've had a few cards in the recent history of Hearthstone that have started interacting with giving your hero Divine Shield. I think Starlight Groove may have been the first one where you give your hero Divine Shield for 3 mana, and every time you played a holy spell, you would refresh the Divine Shield. This card saw no play, which kind of makes me think that Curious Cumulus, which is an understated 4-drop, that requires the minion to be on the field continuously to get the Divine Shield back onto your face, won't see any play, but just to play Devil's Advocate, this effect has been a thing in the game and isn't particularly strong from what I've seen. There's also Divine Brew, which it says on a character, so in case you didn't know this, you could put it on your own face. Situational, that's quite useful, but the problem with Divine Shield is, you know, again, getting down to this button theory, a lot of the buttons can just ping the Divine Shield off for 1 damage, in which case you can just run your minions through, completely happy in the fact that the Divine Shield is gone. I do appreciate Curious Cumulus, you'd probably want to knock off the board, in which regards it's kind of like Bolfram Shield in some way. It gives your hero kind of like 5 health because you're going to want to deal with it so the hero is not constantly Divine Shielded. And the Divine Shield will protect some amount of damage, where again, unlike Bolf, which was effectively giving your hero 9 health, Curious Cumulus is giving your hero 5 health, assuming your opponent actually cares to trade it, because if a mage goes into this, they might not care, they might just use the 2 mana to ping it every single turn. But assuming they do care, it's the 5 health of the minion, plus whatever damage the Divine Shield blocks. And this is the inherent problem. Your opponent is probably not going to run in like a 4-attack minion into your Divine Shield, unless they are forced to, so yeah, I don't see it, but again, until we see the full package, and spoilers, there is a card later on that we'll see that is Divine Shield focused, but until we see the full package, I don't see this card really making any waves. Final things to mention about this, Evasion, the secret from Rogue, didn't see that much play. And that was kind of a better version of this effect, because you would take one source of damage and then it would make you immune, rather than Curious Cumulus, which protected you from one source of damage and then you took normal damage. And also, Lumia isn't seeing that much play right now, and I'd argue that Lumia is better than Curious Cumulus. Now, I do appreciate Lumia's in a class that doesn't really have a great control card options, and I think Curious Cumulus does lean towards this more control-oriented card than aggressive cards. So, maybe it being a neutral situationally in some deck might become worthwhile, but I suspect pack filler. Then we have Mother Duck, 4 mana 2/3 beast, Battlecry, summon 3 1/1 ducklings with Rush. There's only one card I can compare this to, honestly, and it's the Jailer. Because why would you ever kill this adorable card? Their little adorable ducklings. I actually couldn't find the art for the ducklings, but I'm going to presume they're as adorable as the art of the Mother Duck is. So this is, this is 4 mana, 5/6, immune, right? Because you know it's going to be heartless enough to kill a Mother Duck and her little ducklings. Jokes aside, I actually think this card's low-key kind of okay. No? Because as I said, it's 4 mana, and you're getting 5/6 stat line with it, where 3 of it has Rush. And also, more importantly, sorry, it's actually 6 of the stats get Rush, but, as 1/1s. More importantly, you can split it up any way you like, which is a really good deal normally. And it's actually got some other advantages to that. So, if we, delve into this, 3 1/1 minions with Rush is the effect of Coordinated Strike. That is a 3 mana card. Did Coordinated Strike see any play? No. However, Crop Rotation, which summoned 4 undead with Rush, saw a bit of play at 3. Now, I do appreciate that saw some play because there was undead synergy and also corpse synergy, so it was actually a better deal in Death Knight. It does sort of imply, though, it's not a million miles away from 3 1/1s with Rush being about a 3 mana-ish effect. I'd actually say if you're going to aggressively push it, it would be a 2 mana effect. And if you actually take that as the deal, Mother Duck is a 2 mana summon 3 1/1s with Rush, and you get a 2 mana 2/3 on top of it, which is a reasonable stat line, right? So I think the card is actually not that bad. Now, you might point at me and go well, Possessifier sees no play, right? And this is kind of like a 5 mana 7/7. If you count that the 2 1/1 fighters you get both have Rush, they also have Reborn, so if you can trade them out, you get 1/1 stat lines after that as well. True, and it is a better deal. You're getting 7/7 stats for 5 rather than 5/6 for 4. However, what Mother Duck has that Possessifier doesn't have is a tribe. It's a beast, and beasts have some pretty good synergy, and going into the set, it looks like they're going to get more synergy based on the Infuse option for Hunter. But even without that, if you have a jungle gym on the board and you play your Mother Duck, that's 4 beasts you just put on the board for your jungle gym. That's a pretty good deal, and there's, some token synergy out there in Hunterland right now. Painted Canvassaur is still in the game as well. Maybe you play your Mother Duck into your Painted Canvassaur, and you get a bunch of little ducklings with stuff like, Reborn, because I don't think they could get the Rush again, so it'd be some other effect. That's pretty good, honestly. The final thing I'll just mention on this, and I don't think it's going to be a realistic synergy, but there are a few cards out there, mainly in Paladin land, where you reduce the health of an enemy minion to 1. Varanus is rotating back into the Hunter set, so Hunter has the ability to do it. Shaman also has Lock On right now, which can take someone to 1 health. And Mother Duck is a very efficient way just to trade into a 1 health minion. So, yeah, maybe combo of Mother Duck and Varanus, the most unlikely pair. Never know. Actually, you do know. It won't be a thing. Ancient of Yore. 5 mana 5/5 minion, dormant for 2 turns, while dormant gain 5 armor, and draw a card at the end of your turn. Okay, this card is clearly based strongly off Ancient of Lore. This is one of the classic Hearthstone cards. I think it was in the original set. A current iteration of it, which funnily enough is rotating out of the core set, I think, at this moment in time, is 7 mana 7/7, draw 2 cards as one of the choose 1 options, or restore 7 health. Now, if you go far enough back, and this is kind of like what the card is leaning to, it used to be a 7 mana 5/5. If you go far enough back, actually, it used to restore 8 health, but for a decent amount of time, it used to restore 5 health. For a brief period of time, it drew 1 card. This card has been changed quite a lot, but either way, so the 5/5 stat line is coming from the fact that Ancient of Lore used to be a 5/5, and I think the 5 armor is linking to the fact that it used to restore 5 health, so there is a lot of, nods to the past. And actually, also, if you look at the effect, you're dormant for 2 turns, you're guaranteed to draw 2 cards from its dormancy, because that's the effect. At the end of the turn, while you're dormant, you're getting a draw card option. So it's very similar to Ancient of Lore, but you get the combined effect over a card, but instead of it being instant, it's over time. And I've seen some people on paper, well, let's say on paper, on digital, I guess, because I've been seeing it on the internet, really rating this card. They think it's actually pretty good. I'm here to tell you I think this card is garbage, but we'll see. I think a lot of people are seeing this and going like, oh, it's Needle Rock Totem, right, but better. Instead of being a 2-mana 0/2, which is obviously a terrible stat line, which only gave you 2 armor and drew a card, this is a 5-mana 5/5. You're getting 5 armor, you're still getting a card draw, and more importantly, Needle Rock Totem could be removed from the board, right? Ancient of Yore can't. You have to get... Sorry, you're going to basically have to give your opponent 10 armor and 2 card draw, which is pretty good if you're playing some sort of control deck. My big issue with this card, though, is it's really slow, and it's actually not a lot of great value, because when you really, like, you know, boil it down of what you're actually getting for this, gain 5 armor and draw a card. That is the effect of Shield Block, right, which is a 2-mana spell that doesn't really see any play, with the exception of Odin decks. Odin's rotating out, but Odin wouldn't have been great with this anyway, because you get the armor at the end of the turn. And actually, that to get back to the point, not only is this just the Shield Block effect, which means you're paying 5 mana for a 2-mana effect on the turn you play this, it's actually Shield Block minus, because you get the armor at the end of the turn, you get the card at the end of the turn, so you can't use the card or the armor if you have, you know, any effect which is like deal damage based on armor. You can't do it because the Ancient of Yore gives it you at the end of the turn. So you're basically getting Shield Block minus, which, if I was going to be really rude, would be a 1-mana like effect for 5 mana. You get that for 2 turns, and then on the 3rd turn you get the 5/5 stat line, which is probably about a 4-mana effect. I think you could conceivably say this is 7 mana, bundled together over 3 turns, and I think that's actually a pretty bad deal on a card. Now, if there are enough control-based cards out there, and you can just gain endless amounts of armor, maybe this sees play if the game gets very slow, because it is draw 2 cards in 1 card, and it is something that you're going to have to deal with eventually. It will come up on the board, and when you total it all together, it's fine, right? But if the meta is vaguely fast, and, you know, in recent times, there's almost always been a pretty super turbo-aggressive deck, this card will just be simply too slow. You will not survive playing this on 5. So yeah, that's my theory on it. But again, we'll have to see what the other cards are. Maybe there's not going to be a super aggressive deck. The other thing I'll mention is if you're really all about gaining a ton of armor, just play a spaceship deck and just cheat armor out by copying the starship with the Death Rattle gain armor mechanic 18 million times, and that's your way to win the game. We also have Spore Gnasher. 5-mana 1/5 poisonous, Death Rattle, deal 1 damage to a random enemy minion. This card, firstly, is adorable in terms of art. I love that it has teeth on the sides of like its little, you know, frill at the front or its head, which clearly aren't doing any gnashing, but yeah, I really like the art of this card. There's not a lot again to say about this card. It's quite similar to Trog Gloom Eater, which I think was back in Kobolds and Catacombs, right? Was this when this card came out? It's a pretty old card, but I distinctly remember this card seeing a lot of play in free-to-play decks, because again, if you look at this as a minion, you see this as a 1/5 stat line, right? If you're a minion in the game of Hearthstone, though, you would see this as Infinity 5. Poisonous is a really strong keyword, right? Hence why Poisonous is normally on pretty low stat line cards for the mana cost. And indeed, in this case, Trog Gloom Eater, you're only getting 6 stats for 5 mana, which is obviously a bad deal. However, again, to a minion, Poisonous is everything. So, as long as you get Poisonous on a minion with a big amount of health, which is what Trog Gloom Eater was, you were happy. And actually, Trog also had Taunt, so you had to break through it. And if you're playing minion-based Hearthstone, which I definitely would say there was more minion-based Hearthstone in the past than there is now, then this was a real roadblock, right? A serious roadblock. Now, Spore Gnasher is missing the Poisonous. However, you're going to take someone down with this guy. Not quite guaranteed, but there's a decent chance. The Death Rattle deal 1 damage to a random enemy minion will have the Poisonous attached to it. So, when Spore Gnasher dies, it will trade someone. Now, obviously, if this hits Divine Shield, but womp womp, you're out of luck. You're not going to get the kill with it, so I do think it's too weak to see any play, but it's not a million miles away. Actually, the card I was also thinking of when Spore Gnasher was like revealed was Venomous Scorpid, which again was like the classic card in free-to-play decks around the Barons, I think it was. A 3-mana 1/3 Poisonous that discovered a spell. There was a chance you could trade it into a guy and not have the Scorpid killed, and it would just kill someone in the process. And discovering a spell is pretty good in free-to-play decks because you wouldn't have the entire package of the cards, right? So, Poisonous is often a pretty strong effect. I think Spore Gnasher is probably one of the better Poisonous cards out there. Is it good enough for modern Hearthstone? I'm not sure, but I don't think it's a million miles away. We also have Scavenging Flytrap, 7-mana 2/7. After a minion dies, gain its attack. Okay, you're gonna have to imagine really hard here. This card is very similar to Glug the Gulper. Basically because when minions die, it gets stronger. That's effectively the only comparison we can draw. They're also both 7 mana. After that, the comparison just completely falls apart because, you know, Glug has a tribe on it. Glug also gains the stats of both the attack and health. I would say Glug is only on friendly, whereas Scavenging, it has the upside because it's on both sides of the board. If you kill an opposing minion, you'll gain its attack. If an ally minion dies, you'll gain its attack. But you're only gaining the attack. And this is the other issue of Flytrap versus Gulper. Glug was good enough to come along with 3 other minions, and they had Taunt, so it was really hard to kill the Glug. And this, again, is kind of why I think Scavenging won't see any play. It's just too much setup, right, to get this card, like, juiced up enough for it to see any play. When you really bear in mind that if you have 5 attack worth of, you know, minions die, you're still only at a 7 mana 7/7, which wouldn't see any play. So at what tipping point would this card see play as a standard card with effectively no type of effect, right? Just ignore the effect right now. If you could get the perfect stat line, I don't know where you'd have to get to for 7 mana. It might have to be like 12 attack, there or thereabouts, to have any chance, because then it at least puts out a pretty big threat of a huge chunk of damage. But even then, I'm not sure that would still see play, so yeah, for those reasons, basically, I just don't see a world where this will see play. It's too fragile if you set it up, so the juice isn't worth the squeeze in that regard, and also, you have to set it up in the first place, which is not easy when you're playing a 7 mana card. I do appreciate Ysera can take you up to 15 mana, so you have 8 mana to work with, but again, do you want to jump through all the hoops of waiting till turn 15, playing a Ysera? Well, I guess having Ysera in your deck would be good enough, but maybe playing Ysera over the course of the game to ramp up a little bit more. To play Scavenging Flytrap plus 8 mana of cards that are going to die and, you know, give it attack to this guy, it's not worth it. Things you could do with this, though, you could use Murmur to have your minions instantly pop, but again, you need 6 other mana to play the Murmur, or hope Murmur lives on the board. But if you can get that situation, then you could play a bunch of Battle Cries with it. They all pop. You get the Battle Cry effect, which is kind of what you wanted, but you don't completely lose out on the stat line. It goes into the Scavenging Flytrap instead. Also, if you can generate a cheap board clear for your opponent's side of the field, for example, from, oh my god, I look, Sandragil? Is that what it's called? It's like Yggdrasil, but Hearthstone-ified. If you get that card and corrupt it, there is Corrupted Awakening in there, which is a pretty good control card for the opponent's side of the board for cheap mana. And it would be a pretty nice combo with Scavenging Flytrap, but it's not worth jumping through the hoops, right, of getting the corruption effect on that spell, getting a Scavenging Flytrap, play it on the board, waiting for your opponent to have a board, playing Corrupted Awakening, clearing their board, and then getting the stat line onto this thing for only just a pop later. Not worth it. There's also Meadow Strider, 8 mana 6/11 Beast, Taunt. Death Rattle, put a Meadow Strider on the bottom of your deck, it costs 1. Interesting. We've seen quite a lot of these cards in like the last year or two now, where the cards have a Death Rattle, put it back into the deck. And normally I think this card could see some play purely because in a control v control matchup, it stops you from decking out, basically. So for example, Student of the Stars was in the game in the Titan set, and sometimes a control priest would tech this into their ETC, just in case you went into the mirror and you needed something that would let the game go on inevitably. Obviously, Kill Giant has been added to the game now, so you wouldn't ever do this, but back then, maybe it was a consideration. And Student of the Stars, you know, got stronger and stronger and stronger over time as it got shuffled into the deck. Floppy Hydra is a very similar deal as well in the neutral set, where it doubles its stat line and gets bigger and bigger over time. Bottom Feeder, again, similar to the Floppy Hydra, got stronger and stronger over time. And here is why I'm going to tell you that Meadow Strider is probably not going to work. Bottom Feeder was in a set with Dredge, which let you look at the bottom of your deck. And Bottom Feeder wasn't good enough to see any significant play in that meta. Student of the Stars and Floppy Hydra don't really see any play currently, because there's not great ways to pull them back out. Floppy Hydra can get pulled out with certain beast deck cards, but that's about it. And either way, they are simply too slow. You could also look at the Amalgam, the one-drop Amalgam, that keeps all the effects. Sure, some people make those decks work, but they're never like tier 1 or tier 2, because they're just too slow, too susceptible to getting removed from the game as well, because they're a death rattle. I will say this has some upsides to it, though. The Taunt being on a big, beefy boy is pretty nice. It is understated for the cost. You're only getting 17 stats for 8 mana. That's not a great deal. But it's not the end of the world as minions go, right? Also, because it's a beast, you can actually shoot for it in some ways. Master Skull, for example, in Hunter, you can discover a minion from your deck. If you make just Beast Hunter, you can get all 3 of them, and I believe Master's Call is staying in the core set, right? Also, Niall maybe can find this from the deck, possibly after it's died as well, so you can get the 1-cost version of it. And then maybe you can copy it with various cards from the Discover package and get a bunch of 1-drop Meadow Striders and just put up a huge wall. That'd be pretty nice. Pipsy can find it as well. It's a bit slow because Paladin's not great at doing that type of thing. Sorry, it's a bit slow and Paladin's not great at doing that type of thing right now. It should be more clear. But if you wanted a Divine Shield, Rush, and Taunt minion, this could be your Taunt minion. Why you would pick this over, you know, Unkiliax? I guess Unkiliax can meet the other 2 requirements, so maybe you just fill out your deck with this being the Taunt minion. Possibly. Now, here's where things do get a bit interesting, though. If you have a Meadow Strider die on your side of the field, and it becomes a 1-cost, there are a few cards out there that tutor for cards that cost an amount or less. Oaken Summons is one of them, so if you have this thing die, Oaken Summons could pull it out of your deck. And that's not that unreasonable for Druid, especially like a Dungar Druid, where you use Dungar to cheat out your first Meadow Strider, a Meadow Strider dies, and then you use Oaken Summons in a deck which probably hasn't got small minions in it, to then cheat out a Meadow Strider from your deck and bring it back onto the field again, as effectively a 4-mana 6/11 instead with the Oaken Summons effect and gaining 6 armor. Not terrible. Also even spicier, what about Trusty Fishing Rod? You put it in a Hunter deck, or you tourist into Hunter, which I think is a... Is it Priest that tourist into Hunter? Or the reverse? It's the reverse, right? Who goes into Hunter? I've actually completely forgotten my tourist things. Hunter goes into Warrior, right? Oh no, it is. It's Priest. Priest goes into Hunter. So maybe you put this in your Priest deck as well. But either way, have a Meadow Strider die, it goes into your deck as a 1-cost, and then you swing with the Trusty Fishing Rod, and it summons a 1-drop from your deck, which happens to be a 6/11 Taunt Death Rattle Beast, which puts Meadow Strider back on the bottom of the deck. And by the way, it will do this every single time, so you could then swing with your Trusty Fishing Rod again and bring it back. That's a seriously scary combo wombo if you can set it up, but that's going to be the key in the matter. Is it easy to set up? It is an 8-cost beast. Bear in mind, though, the Infuse effect again on Hunter does reduce the cost of a beast in your hand at random, so maybe Hunter will try and do this thing with Trusty Fishing Rod and bringing it back over and over again. I actually don't think that's too far from the realms of possibility, assuming you can get some discounts on this guy. The final one, just to be aware of, I don't think this will actually see any play, but Sonya Water Dancer. It wouldn't be a reveal stream without a Sonya Water Dancer on here, trying to break the game in some way. It got nerfed to be only working on minions and not spells, which basically killed the card. Meadow Strider, when it becomes a 1-cost card, can get Sonya, so you'd get a 0-cost copy of it as well, which would mean that, you know, you could play the 1-cost or 0-cost, both would get shuffled into your deck, and you would sort of have this endless deck of Meadow Striders eventually. It would be hard to tutor for this, particularly in Rogue, but not completely impossible. They do have tutors for just a minion, and maybe you run a very, like, minion low density deck, and you just have this Sonya Meadow Strider thing as a win condition. I don't see it, but just bear it in mind. Next we have Scorching Observer, 9-mana 7/9 Demon, Rush, Lifesteal. It's a great keyword combo. We've seen it fairly infrequently, but when you do see it, it's normally on a good card. Rainbow Seamstress could get Lifesteal Reborn and Rush for that matter. This card saw a bit of play. Fire the Setting Sun saw play in Dragon Druid, had Rush, Lifesteal, also Taunt on it, which was also pretty nice. Walking Fountain, Big Boy, Lifesteal, Rush, Wind Fury, which is actually not too dissimilar from just having a bigger stat line like the Scorching Observer has. So I think this is actually a pretty good comparison. And then Unkiliax obviously can have this effect because it was on Celiax. So I actually think it's a pretty solid effect. Do I think it's good enough to see play in Standard? No, it's not good enough, but it's one of those cards, if you generate it, let's say you generate it from Kil'jaeden, it could really change the course of a game. If you get this with like a bit of staff buff on it, it's a very fast way to gain lifesteal, which means if you're playing a control deck, you love that type of thing, because you get aggro down early, you play a big boy, you lifesteal a big chunk back, and then the aggro deck is super unhappy. They have to do that damage all over again, and they don't have a late game unlike you. This is the other issue of this card. It is a very late game card. It's a 9-mana minion, so it's probably just too slow to see play in Standard. Again, it's understated for 9-drop as well. But if you find it as a random demon, I can see it being a game-changing card. The final card we're going to deal with is not a neutral, it's a paladin card. Tareth the Unbreaking. 5-mana 3/4 minion. Divine Shield Taunt. Your Divine Shields take 3 hits to break. When I first saw this, I was like, what the fuck are they thinking? Like, this card is disgusting, right? Because it has taunt, it protects your face, right? So they have to swing 3 times into it to break the Divine Shield, then kill this guy. So it's 4 swings into it. It's basically the unbreakable wall. I guess the clue is in the name, right? But then I got thinking about it, and I was like, hang on a minute. Isn't, like, Divine Shield, you know, taking 3 hits to break just the same as Divine Shield plus Reborn? And Cool Ghoul sees no play whatsoever. And in some regards, Cool Ghoul is better because you're guaranteed for it to, when it dies, for it to come back. The problem with Toreth right now, as I'll deal with in a bit, is it can just get killed, right? You can just use a targeted kill a guy card, and it doesn't matter if your Divine Shields take 3 hits to break, you're gonna break. You're gonna pop. And also, this isn't a rest of game effect, it's an aura, so it only works while this guy is on the field. So yeah, I got looking through the history of Hearthstone cards for Divine Shield Reborn. It's not a common combination, to be honest with you. It's on Unkiliax as well. But in terms of just base minions, Colossus the Moon is the other one. So I kind of see Tereth the Unbreaking sitting somewhere in quality between Cool Ghoul and Colossus the Moon. Colossus the Moon saw a little bit of play as a big boy to get cheated out. Tereth isn't quite as big. I mean, it's only a 3/4 stat line. That's something you would see on a 3-mana card. This is a 5-mana card, so it's pretty, pricey. So yeah, I don't actually think this card is as scary as you'd think, though if you are just playing a minion-based minion matchup, you're going to have a nightmare versus this thing. It's going to be really, really annoying to deal with, especially because there's actually quite a few ways to put Divine Shield on things, right? Divine Brew. You break through the Divine Shield eventually by 3 trades, 1-mana card, put a Divine Shield on a guy. And more to the point, you could put the Divine Shields on some of your other minions, right? And they get the Unbreaking effect as well. Not just Tereth, but anyone with Divine Shield. Including things with Rush, right? Because I think part of the balance on this card, which is actually quite smart about it, is they gave it Taunt so you couldn't hide Tereth behind another Taunt minion. So if someone else has Taunt, you have to... Oh, sorry, you can still kill the Tereth, right? But if you use a Rush with it, you can actually proactively get its effect to be useful. You can use Tigress Plushie to trade into a guy with the Rush Divine Shield, and you retain the Divine Shield on it. So anything with Rush Divine Shield, that includes Unkiliax, very good with Toreth. The other thing to be bearing in mind is, if you give your face Divine Shield, that's a pretty good protection. I was saying Curious Cumulus is not a great card, because Divine Shield can just pop in 1 little bit of instance of damage. If you suddenly turn into 3 instances of damage, then Curious Cumulus would become extremely, extremely scary, but yeah. Fortunately, that isn't going to be really the case for the most part, because I don't think Toreth is the hardest card to remove. You can also tutor for this card if you're particularly wanting to play it with something like Trinket Artist. But again, the big downside of this card is you pay 5 mana for a 3/4, which isn't particularly aggressive. And what if your opponent just suffocates it? What if your opponent just deadlines it? I know deadlines don't really see much play right now, but there are other cards that just say destroy a guy. Toreth just can't deal with that, and typically the value of a destroy a minion card is under a 5-drop. Like Assassinate, for example, which doesn't see any play, is 4 mana, kill a guy. So it's a big mana loss if your opponent just pings this with one of those targeted cards. And if Toreth was ever strong, every deck out there would run as a tech card, just kill a guy as a card. It's also a bit of a nightmare card to get stolen in some way, and Bob the Bartender is still in the game. I do appreciate Bob is a 6-mana card, so you do get some value if this is the thing that they steal off you. It's still pretty annoying that you're going to have to deal with it going forwards. Fortunately, though, MCT is not in the game. If MCT was in the game, Toreth would, I think, literally be Toreth the Unplayable, because you would just run MCT in your deck, steal the Toreth from your opponent, and then cause them to have big, salty, sad tears, and cause them to go to the Hearthstone Reddit. Anyway, that is all the neutral cards, and, plus a Paladin card. Over the next few days, we'll see all the class cards. And I think they're doing it the nice way like they normally do now, where they'll show all the Druid cards and all the Warrior cards and so on and so forth through the classes. So expect to see videos going forwards of either me covering one of the classes at a time or 2 of the classes within one video. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, why not leave a like, comment, subscribe. Everything helps me out. I'll see you next time. Bye!